Hi everyone, Sam here. Welcome to another episode of Azure Snippets. In a previous video, we looked at using VS Code for developing ARM templates, and in particular, we looked at a few extensions you could use to make that job easier. One of these was the official Microsoft Azure Resource Manager Tools extension. Now, this extension was fairly basic, but it's received quite a few updates of late, and so I thought it was worth doing a video just to look at this new version of the extension and what it provides and how you can use it to make your life easier when you're building ARM templates in VS Code. So first thing, you need to make sure you've got the extension installed. So this is the extension you're looking for, the Azure Resource Manager ARM Tools, created by Microsoft, and I'll put a link below the video. This is what you need to have installed, and I've got that installed already. So let's take a look at what it can do. I'm going to go ahead and create a blank file. And so the first new thing I want to talk about is Snippets. So if you weren't aware, I actually produced a Visual Studio Code extension called Azure Resource Manager Snippets that brought snippets for template design. This extension has now been integrated into the official extension, so you no longer need my extension, and it's now part of the official extension, which makes it easier to install, but also has some additional benefits. So to be able to use the snippets, VS Code needs to know what type of file you're using. Now in the past, when you've set the file type, which you can do with Control-K-M, you generally have gone with JSON or JSON-C as a file type. Going forward, ARM templates now actually have their own type in VS Code. So you can see here in this list, there is an Azure Resource Manager template type. And so that's what you really want to use, because what's also been added to the extension, which we'll look at in a little more detail later, is that there is a language server now for ARM templates, which means you need your own specific type for that language server to actually hook onto. So we're going to select the Azure Resource Manager template type. And now, if we start typing ARM, we get all the ARM snippets. So we can pick the first one, just ARM on its own, and that will give us the skeleton of an ARM template. And then we can use these snippets further to actually go and populate our template. So let's start with parameters. We'll add a parameter. There's actually a snippet for parameter. So if we type that, it'll give us the basic parameter values. Same with variable. But then the really useful thing is when we start looking at resources. So let's go and look at deploying a storage account. And then we'll also go and look at deploying an Azure function. And so that's gone ahead and created all the syntax we need to do that. It's filled in the fields with the default value, which obviously you can see here is underlined because I haven't got those values in my template. So the assumption is that you will replace those, and it makes it easier to do that by the fact that you can actually tab through the values. And some of them, even like this one, are actually going to have drop downs for you to select the correct value from. So for example, this runtime, I can pick .NET, Node or Java. We'll go with Node, and that'll fill that in for me. So it makes it really easy to get started, knowing what all the values are and where you need to put your own values into the template. There are literally hundreds of snippets available for most common Azure resources. They're getting added to all the time. I personally commit code to this, obviously, because it came out of my extension. But you can see there are a pretty hefty amount of templates in here. There's also, if we create another new page, a template for the parameters file as well, which is something I generally forget the syntax for. So that will give you the file for actually creating a parameters file as well. So that's snippets. Let's have a look at some other functionality. So I've got some templates already written here. So if we click on one of those, you'll notice that first of all it has actually already converted this into the Azure Resource Manager template type. But it's also picked up here that the schema I'm using for my template is actually old. So there is a newer schema. And so it's asking me if I actually want to update that. So if we click Use Latest, that's going to update the template schema for me. Pretty useful to make sure you're keeping your templates up to date. So moving on, another benefit of the fact that we have this new language server is that code completion in Intellisense is much quicker and much more reliable. So if we go have a look at this template here, I want to use this public IP address parameter in my code. And come in here quickly, and we can type parameters, and we get the Intellisense there, and it's pretty instant. If you tried to use this previously on the old version extension, this functionality was included, but it was often pretty slow to actually pick up what you needed, and sometimes it just didn't work at all. So this is much more reliable, and I can now come in here and say, okay, parameters, and then we can type that, and it's going to give us the code completion for the actual parameter name. So it's much quicker and much more reliable. Some more benefits of the language server: we're getting color coding on different functions. We can actually hover over them and get actual documentation about the particular function. We also get much better error messages and identifying issues in code before we run them. So let's take an example here. If we do use the toUpper function, and I'm going to put the bracket in the wrong place. So it's very quickly recognizes an error there. Before, that could take a while. And if we hover over it, we can see that it's giving us a fairly useful error message. The function toUpper expects one argument, and because of where we place that bracket there, it's actually getting more than one. So we know we can fix that. And there we go. Much better. You can also see up here I've got an error because my type is incorrect. So we hover over that. It gives us information that the type is invalid. And actually there's also a sort of orange wiggly line here which is telling us that is giving us some hints about what this type needs to be. So it needs to be one of the following. Now this one perhaps isn't so useful because there's a fairly massive list here. But when you've got a much smaller list of types and so on, it can be quite useful. So we can go ahead and fix that, and those errors will go away. Another good feature that I can't really demonstrate very easily, but is the fact that validation now is case insensitive. So ARM templates themselves are not case sensitive, but JSON as a language, when you just use plain old JSON file, was. Any validation where you had the case different was highlighted as an error where it didn't really matter to the template at all. So that's now case insensitive, which is great. Back on some of the documentation parts, you can also see if you hover over a property of a resource, you actually get the documentation for that as well. So we can see what public IP allocation method is. That's pretty useful if you're using the snippets and you want to find out what a particular thing is. So that's really useful. We've now got some of the standard functionality you get with other languages in ARM templates. So things like if I want to go have a look at what this public IP address name parameter is, I can right click on it and go to definition and it'll take me there. Or I can even use the peak definition and it will show me that in line. And I can also do things like find all references, which will show me wherever that is used. So pretty useful if you've got a lot of parameters or a lot of dependencies and so on. You can have it look through the code for you. So as well as all that, the fact that we now have this dedicated language server for ARM templates means that the interpreter for the template can do a much better job of specializing it to ARM. So things that JSON perhaps would call out as an error but aren't an error in ARM templates are now not called out. Things like adding comments. I can add comments to an ARM template file even without it being a JSON-C file. And it won't highlight that as an error for me because it knows that comments are allowed in ARM templates. So all in all, this new language server should make building ARM templates much, much simpler. So there you have it. That's the updates to the ARM template extension for Visual Studio Code. I think they're a really great improvement. It's great for me to be able to get my snippet extension in there, but some of the other changes are great, particularly the new language server. So great work to the ARM template team at Microsoft, and hopefully you'll find that useful and it will help you building your ARM templates. That's all I've got for you today. I hope that was useful, and I'll see you next time on Azure Snippets.